even though it's not based on the way Hashem created the world and all of that, he follows that calendar. So if a group of people decide that this and this day is their new year, so whatever a new year is happens for them. And of course, in Hasidus, we're taught that we don't call it New Year, we call it the head of the year. And there's a very, very big difference between calling it the beginning of the year and the head of the year, because by calling it Rosh Hashanah, you make it to have a relationship with your entire unit of time, like the relation between a head and a body. And all of us understand that the head is not just a new body, it's the nerve center, it's the source of everything in a person. So today is January 1st, so it's called New Year's. But in Torah, it's not New Year's, it's Rosh Hashanah. There's a big difference between calling today New Year's and calling it Rosh Hashanah. New Year's means that your clock just turned, you turn the page. Rosh Hashanah means the day of judgment, they wish the judges. And on the day of judgment, you have to be busy with important things, right? There's one thing about Jewish people in judgment, which is that we're not afraid. We're being judged and we're not afraid. The two of them is that normally when someone's being judged, so although they'll only be tried, their sentence has not been passed, but the simple fact that you're being examined with a fine-tooth comb is very unnerving, and it puts a person in a position of inferiority, of fear, of concern. So when a person is being taken into court, they put on a suit so the jury should like how they look, but they're not exactly in the greatest of moods. Can't get my beard to go straight. The New Year is not cooperating with me. But a Yid that Rosh Hashanah is not afraid. Why? You know he's not afraid? Because the judge has an interest in us. When somebody judges you, they're supposed to judge with equity. They're supposed to be honest. They're supposed to be honorable, right? But there's different kinds of judges. And sometimes you're judged by people who don't know you. They don't know who you are, what you do, and what your value is. So they judge the facts. But when you know the person, there's a whole different spirit. But the image of judgment is all of humanity, not just Jewish people, all of humanity. But especially when it comes to Jewish people, he knows exactly who he's judging. And believe it or not, and as little sense as it may make, he made us because Kayachal there's an interest in it for him. As much as he can't say that he needs us, he needs us. He created us for a reason. So if we fail, he fails. If we go down, he goes down. So the judgment is in that context. That's why when Rosh Hashanah comes, you're not afraid. I once said, and I'm going to repeat it now because I think it's quite acute. When a person judges, should they be more severe or they should be less severe in judgment? Now, the reality of life is that you judge strangers more severely than you judge people that you know. It's just human nature. Because when you judge a stranger, you judge them much more clinically. You almost forget that they're a person. When you judge someone that's familiar to you, the humanity plays into the judgment. But the truth of the matter is, it's exactly the opposite. The less familiar you are with somebody, the more benevolent you must be. Because if you know somebody and you're punitive, you're strict, you understand the context of that strictness. If you don't know somebody and you're punitive, you're cruel, mamish. And sometimes so cruel that you cross over that line from being a severe judge to being pashut evil. So in counterintuition, the opposite of what most people think, when judging somebody that's closest to you, you can afford to be the most critical. The further someone is away from you, the more lenient you have to be. That's what the Torah says, that the system of the courts is set up to find the person not guilty. The liability, the need to prove that a person is guilty and to punish a person is on the prosecution, not on the defense. Now, in Dinei Torah, there's a whole different set of rules, but in any kind of civil system where you have judges and judgment, and you have law and you have order, a judge has to never forget that how quickly he can forget that he's dealing with people, the human beings, not with pieces of meat. You have to throw them away and buy a different piece. Anyway, David is judging the whole world today because the whole world decided, at least the Christian world decided, what do we want to call it, the European world, the Western world. I'm not exactly sure what world it is, but billions of people on the planet consider today the New Year's. And of course, we don't only say New Year's, we say Rosh Hashanah. They don't say Rosh Hashanah, they don't the concept of Rosh Hashanah. That's the head of the year. So the bracha for this coming year, 2025, is in today. So what should say? Rabbi Paltiel, what should they do today? It's just interesting how the difference between how a Yid celebrates Rosh Hashanah and a Goy celebrates Rosh Hashanah. How's the Yid celebrates Rosh Hashanah? He says he sleeps as little as possible, eats as little as possible, he talks as little as possible. He says Tillim, goes to shul all day, but he puts on Shabbos clothes. Yeah. And what do we do at midnight? Yeah. You say l'chaim and you have a fabrengen. It's a new year. Okay, maybe it's the right way to do it. You know, they tell a story about a Yid who was a fundraiser, opinion shvoyim, and he found himself in a terrible situation where there was a family that was locked up, and he needed to get him out of jail, and he needed several hundred ruble, and he couldn't find the money. So he went into a tavern, into a bar. There were a bunch of people sitting there, and they were not exactly the most righteous people in the community. And there was a man there with a lot of money, but he was a cynical person. So he said to this chassid, to this person, that for every cup of alcohol he'll drink, he'll give him a certain number of ruble towards his total that he needed. And the guy got himself plaster drunk. Erev Kippur. But he got up to the whole sum, and before Yom Kippur, he went to wherever these people were being held and he had them released. He came into shul, could barely walk. It's Yom Kippur. And he walked into the shul, and everyone was so earnest. He runs out on a Kodesh and he pulls open the curtain. The night of Yom Kippur, you open up on a Kodesh, but you take out the Sefer Torah for Kol Nidre. And he starts saying, Taresa, like it's Simchas Torah. So the people in the shul said, "Oh, we have a shikhet on our hands," and they want to. So the holy Baditchev Rav turns around and says, "By him, it's already Simchas Torah." He missed the whole judgment. So maybe there's a value in saying L'chaim. And the Rosh Hashanah, the Ikir, the Hashem to bless every single one of his creations, and certainly one of the Jewish people. But they were what a good year. I'm getting a little carried away with this Rosh Hashanah stuff over here. Okay, now what is my topic? What is my topic? My topic is Chamisha B'Teves, Hey Teves. Which is in 4 days hence. If today is Aleph Teves, and it's Wednesday, right? So Shabbos is Dalet Teves, and Sunday is Hey Teves, Chamisha B'Teves, the 5th day of the 4th month of the winter cycle, Chamisha B'Teves. Now, I don't know how long you are in Lubavitch, I don't know how initiated you are, so I don't know if you know what Hey Teves is. So I have to speak to the media, and I have to accept that some of you already know about this, and some of you have no idea about. So I need to sort of please everybody, which of course is impossible. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you all heard of Yudas Kislev. Kislev, big deal. Because Kislev Alter Rebbe went to jail twice, or at least we celebrate his going to jail and being released from prison twice. And the truth was, at that time, his life was in danger. He didn't know if he's coming back alive. And then, of course, we had Yud Beis Tammuz, and the previous head was arrested. And they had every intention of shooting him. They had every intention of killing him. It was a nest, a miracle, an incredible nest that the Friedrich Rebbe just took his time going to where he needed to go. And in the meantime, there was enough time to stall and then to delay and then to change his judgment, his verdict. So we appreciate the earnestness of these stories in Chabad history because of the danger to the physical lives of the Alter Rebbe and the previous Rebbe. And therefore, when they were released from prison, it's a big holiday. The Alter Rebbe was released from prison. The Friedrich was released from prison. But it's to an American, it's so funny. I mean, if you come from Russia, it's no big deal. Because going to jail in Russia is almost a mandatory thing. They used to say in the Soviet Union, to be arrested once for being frum is a chiyuv. Twice is being extra frum. 3 is already showing up. Mexican U.S. But you come to America and say, the rabbi went to jail. So what does he think? Embezzlement. Of course the rabbi went to jail, yeah. So when you're announcing to the whole world that the rabbi went to jail and he managed to get out. And of course, you have to understand what kind of rabbi you're dealing with. You're not dealing with a rabbi who's shaykhs to such kind of things like embezzlement, chas v'sholom. But you also have to understand the place. And ultimately, what you need to understand is that we don't celebrate Yitzchak Kislev because Alter Rebbe's life was in danger and he was released from prison. Because had we celebrated the fact that Alter Rebbe went to jail, that his life was in danger, and that when he was released from prison, his life was no longer in danger. If it's a Yom Tov, it would have been a Yom Tov to the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim, but it's not for us. Had we celebrated the fact that the previous Rebbe went to jail, and while in jail, his life was at risk, literally, mortal danger, and then Hashem made a huge nest, a big miracle, and the Rebbe Ayat, the Frierdiker, was released from prison, ultimately the Soviet Union. If the issue was entirely material, that holiday would have been celebrated by the people who knew him personally and loved him. It would not be celebrated by us almost 100 years after. This New Beis Talmud is going to be 98 years since the Frierdiker was released from prison. We celebrate these events. We commemorate these holidays for a religious reason. And the kind of religious reasoning that is still relevant, that withstand the passage of time. In other words, we're not making a holiday because something happened a long time ago. Jews don't do that ever. Jews celebrate current events. We have Hanukkah because the story of Hanukkah and the test of Hanukkah and the miracle of Hanukkah is very current. It's really true. I spoke last night for a group of women, and I spoke to them about the Greek letters versus the Hebrew letters, that famous little clip that's called Lights, where the Greek letters are so much prettier, and the Hebrew letters are old and faded. But the Hebrew letters have a fire, and that fire is the holiness of the Torah, the holiness of the Jewish people, and the holiness which is inside each one of us that makes all this worthwhile, that makes it all make sense. And the Hanukkah story, that if you've ever seen that cartoon, if you haven't, you must see it, is this tough Jew who's become modern, he's become Hellenized, and he's going around peddling the new Greek letters that look so modern, and the Hebrew alphabet is chasing after him. And it's these ugly little pathetic letters, but they have this fire. And the fire really gets under his skin. So at some point in this little performance, he turns on this massive sword, and he tries to kill the fire with his sword. Tries to kill the fire. Wants to kill it. You can't kill the fire. You can't kill the fire. You can only attempt to kill the fire in yourself, but you can't kill the fire. And therefore, Hanukkah is a living Yom Tov, because as we speak, many people, maybe on some level, even ourselves,
Yeah.
have the same test. There's the world. The world is so modern, and the world is so updated. The world has all kinds of new ideas. Every 15 minutes, there's new ideas. And we're drawn into the novelty. We're drawn into the creativity. We're drawn into the, quote, thinking outside of the box, etc., 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 etc. And then there's the old Torah, same Torah, no new rules, same Torah, same Mishnah. But there's a fire. So Hanukkah is celebrated each year because we want to connect to that fire. That's why Hanukkah is celebrated with lights, because we want to connect to that fire. And that's true of every holiday. And the same is also true of Yitas Kislev and Yud Beis Tammuz. The Rabbeim taught us that the story of Beis Tammuz, the story of Yitas Kislev, was not about the physical life of the Rebbe. It was about the spiritual purpose of the Rebbe, which was to bring into this world a new idea in Torah, the idea of Chassidus and Chassidus Chabad and so on, that's supposed to remain in the world once it comes into the world forever, for posterity. And this new, quote, revelation is being challenged. Alter Rebbe went to jail physically because someone didn't like him. But his physical going to jail because someone didn't like him is a reflection of the fact that spiritually, what the Alter Rebbe was doing in revealing Chassidus Chabad was being challenged on high. And his redemption, his Pada B'Shalom Nafshi V'Krov L'Kibberav Ma'yamadi, was the heavens saying, not so much the earth saying that what the Alter Rebbe was doing was correct. That's why we celebrate Yitas Kislev. We do not celebrate Yitas Kislev because of the risk to the Alter Rebbe's physical life. We celebrate Yitas Kislev to the risk for the Alter Rebbe's spiritual purpose. And that after Yitas Kislev, that spiritual purpose was given up with a freedom, an opportunity to be brought into the world. As we know from our tradition, the Rebbe Rashab, the great-great-grandson of the Alter Rebbe, would refer to Yitas Kislev as Reish Hashanah L'Chasidus. Today is Rosh Hashanah, 2025. Yitas Kislev is the Hashanah L'Dach, the Hashanah for Chasidus. That's why we celebrate Yitas Kislev, and that's why we celebrate Yud Beis Tammuz. So although there was at that time a danger to the life of the Rebbe, the fact that this holiday lasts as long as it does is not a reflection of the physical dangers of the physical life of the Rebbe. It's celebrated because it's reflecting the danger that it was to the spiritual purpose of the Rebbe. And that this day marks the vindication, the victory, the Pali B'Sholem of that purpose. And now we can start talking about the books. Okay, again, I don't know you. So I don't know whether you know about Chamisha B'Teves, you don't know about Chamisha B'Teves, but this coming Sunday in Lubavitch, this is a big holiday, and this year it's 38 years. It started in 1987, I suppose, or 1988, depending on how you count. And now it's 2025. It's been a while, yeah, that we have this holiday that we celebrate, and we know how to make a party, and we know how to daven, we know how to make a party, yeah. And what we're celebrating is a nice bit books. And when you hear the story as an outsider, you say, "Really? What's this is the big holiday?" You know, they had a fight. There was a political difference within the family of the Schneersons, and our side won and their side lost. And 38 years later, we're still making a party. Really, that's the story. And of course, the answer is, of course not. Because if that was the story, it would never have been a big deal in the first place, and it certainly would not be a big deal 38 years on. So again, going with the assumption that not everybody knows what this is about, I'm going to tell you the story on a technical level, a very physical level, okay? When our Rebbe assumed the leadership of Lubavitch in 1951, which is now 75 years ago, 75 years ago, there was contention. There was, behind the scenes, there was politics. It wasn't smooth. There was another candidate, and there were people who felt that Lubavitch should be divided up into two. Now, depending on who you ask, you'll get a different answer as to what actually transpired. In other words, the people will give you a much more cynical version of what happened in 1951. But my version, of course, my version is the truth because I never lie, and if I say something, it has to be true. And I'm not planning to be so open-minded as to give you equal time. This is not a political show. This is a Chassidish Fabregan. Chassidim made the decision. Chassidim made the decision. The Rebbe hesitated, the Rebbe balked, the Rebbe didn't want it. He certainly didn't want to be involved in the politics. Chassidim made the decision. Chassidim decided they wanted the Rebbe to be Rebbe, and the Rebbe acquiesced. And I wasn't born in 1951. My father was 12. My father was the first Bar Mitzvah, 11 because I knew my father's lived to be well, was 12 years old. So I wasn't at all limitious. But if you study the story with any sensitivity and any objectivity, the story is that the Rebbe said no. And when the Rebbe said no, he meant no. And Chassidim said yes. And when Chassidim said yes, they apparently really, really meant it. And they changed his mind. The Rebbe agreed to be a Rebbe after for balking and hesitating. And the Rebbe kept on saying, he's not retiring, he's not quitting, but the previous Rebbe is still the Rebbe, and he's still his right-hand man. And the Chassidim didn't want that. The Chassidim wanted that the Rebbe should be a Rebbe. And the Rebbe became a Rebbe. And we make a big celebration. It's a very important day, Yud Shvat, the day the Rebbe officially ascended to the throne, sat on the chair of his predecessor, the Friedrich Rebbe, in the year 1951. But it wasn't easy, it wasn't smooth. One of the issues which was never resolved then was the question of the estate. The belongings of the previous Rebbe, the private property of the Friedrich Rebbe was never resolved. And most Lubavitchers didn't even know about it. The average Lubavitcher did not know about it. And the issues were the following. On the one hand, the tradition in Lubavitch was that when the Rebbe passed away, there was a division of his estate. His children would divide up his property, whatever it was, his home, his spotting, his manuscript. And you could, there's records of this. There's records of the division of the estate. I don't know if we have of the Alter Rebbe, of the Middle Rebbe. We certainly have from the Tzemach Tzedek. We certainly have from the Rebbe Marash. When the Rebbe Rasha passed away, there was no estate to divide because he had one son. But there were divisions of estates. Evidently, there's evidence to the effect that although there was a division of an estate, the Rebbe was not happy about it. The Rebbe Rashab went along with the division of his father's estate, the Rebbe Barash, but he really did not believe that it should be divided. He believed that he was entitled to it. But there was a division of an estate. The Frierdiker passed away and there was no division of the estate. 20 years after the Frierdiker passed away, his wife passed away. And she divided the estate. What did he own? He owned 770, which is a building that today is probably worth $5-6 million. The house, not the apartment building, the house. And the library. The Frierdiker had a library of Sfarim which he collected with great Mercedes Nefesh. The Frierdiker, the Lubavitcher Rebbeim always had a library. That goes back generations. That entire library was confiscated by the Soviets in 1920, 21, 22. That library sits still in Moscow. In the library, the Jewish library near the Rosh Shul in Moscow, the Sfarim are there. The previous Rebbe, when his library was taken away from him and he knew he was not going to get it back, purchased a complete new library. It was called the Wiener Collection in 1925, which is actually 100 years ago this year. And from that point forward, he invested enormously. The Frierdiker Rebbe used to spend money to buy Sfarim that he needed for medicine. Mamish. He was Mesa Nefesh to buy Sfarim. And of course, once the Holocaust happened, you saw why he was Mesa Nefesh, because the Sfarim that he saved, had they not been saved, they'd be destroyed. Amongst the famous purchases that he made at that time was he purchased the original manuscripted Siddur of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov davened and a handwritten Siddur. And I saw a picture of it. They're selling it for $1,000. You can buy a copy of the entire Siddur of the Baal Shem Tov. It's mind-blowing. It's incredible. I was just now in Florida and somebody showed me a copy of it. If it had $1,000 lying around, believe me, I'd pick it up. But it comes from here. The Rebbe has it. Previous Rebbe paid a lot of money for it when he didn't have any money. Anyway, when he came to New York in 1940, he had to leave his library behind. The majority of the library was delivered to him after the war, I think in 1947, and it was put into the basement of 770. Some of the library still remained unaccounted for, and over the years it was discovered and it was found. Some of it was brought back, some of it we have copies of. It's a complicated story. The Frierdiker's wife divided the estate when she passed away in 1971. The Rebbe was deeply unhappy about it. She wrote a will. And she divided it in 3 ways. She gave 40% of it to one daughter, 40% of it to another daughter, and 20% of it to her grandson. She had 1 grandson. The Rebbe was deeply unhappy about it for reasons I'm going to explain momentarily. And as long as nobody actually acted on her will, the Rebbe left it. In 1985, someone acted on the will. They went and took books. But they didn't come with a lawyer and claim their legal rights to it. They came in the middle of the night and stole them. And when the Rebbe discovered this, the Rebbe got really upset. He put up gates, giving them, taking away their actually. He took 470 Sfarim that were priced at millions. Some of the books he bought, individual volumes, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Extremely rare books in very good condition that the Rebbe had in his library. And that's the beginning of the story of the books. Now, what's the big deal? The previous Rebbe had an estate. He passed away. He did not divide his estate. 20 years later, his wife passes away. She divided the estate. It's open and shut. What's the issue? The issue is that the previous Rebbe officially made all of his belongings public. He created an organization in America called Agudas Chassidim Chabad, the Union of Lubavitcher Chassidim, and the building 770 is not registered to Joseph I. Schneerson. It's registered to Agudas Chassidim Chabad. The previous Rebbe used to pay rent every month for his apartment in 770. There was a person who was the business manager of the building, and he was told by the previous Rebbe, every month come to me and I'll pay. The previous Rebbe paid rent to live in his own house. Additionally, the library was registered to the possessions of Agudas Chassidim Chabad, to the Union of Chabad Chassidim, and it was using that umbrella that he was able to save his Sfarim. The books were in Europe. And if the previous Rebbe writes to the United States Army in 1946-47 that he wants his library back, the United States Army is going to say, we got other things to do, like feed starving people. But the previous Rebbe put pressure on the United States government, the United States Army, saying that this was a public trust. They were not private books. They belonged to a community, and they're a trust of the Jewish people. And it's very important that these books be brought to New York so that they can be used to the maximum effect. And it was on that basis that the United States government did whatever it needed to do, and the books were delivered to New York. So this was the issue. The previous Rebbe's wife wrote a will distributing the estate as private property, and the Rebbe said it didn't belong to her. It was public property, it belonged to the union of Agudas Hasidic Chabad. Now, with clout, in America, an organization has to have officers. You know what that means? If you have a group of people that united in a shul, there's 5 or 6 officers that are the official registries on that property, and they have rights. In other words, if you are an officer of a public trust, in a weird kind of way, you can do what you want with it, even though there are many people who gave you that trust, but once they gave you that trust, until they take the trust away from you, you have a lot of power. So who owns 770? The Friedrich Rebbe or Agudas Chabad? Who owns the books? The Friedrich Rebbe or Agudas Chabad? And the argument was, if the Friedrich Rebbe took a book that he owned and threw it in the garbage, would anyone say a word? No one would say boo. Why? Because he do whatever he wanted. If he do whatever he wanted, they really belonged to him. They didn't belong to the trust. And the Rebbe argued that they belonged to a trust. They were not privately owned books. Yes, the Rebbe could do whatever he wanted with the books, but they didn't. But he was able to do that as the leader of Lubavitcher Hasidim. They were not his privately. They belonged to the community of Lubavitcher Hasidim. So there was a court case that lasted a while. Right? This is the summer of 1985. All this came down. The Rebbe spoke about it a few times, and the Rebbe stopped talking about it for whatever reason. And then in the winter of 1985 into 86, that means 39 years ago, during the trial, it lasted about 3 weeks. And Hasidus was on trial. They went through the whole history of Hasidus. They talked about the Chassid Rebbe relationship, the concepts of private and public, the money that Hasidim give a Rebbe for his personal upkeep, which is called Maimed, is given by the community to the Rebbe. And this question of what is that money? Is it private money or is public money was debated in court. And then the judge took exactly a year to give a verdict. 1 year later, and probably in January of 87, the judge gave his verdict, and it was a open and closed case. There was no compromise. Agudas Chassidei Chabad won everything. They won the library, they won the building, won everything, won 100%. Then there was an appeal, and the following year, 1988, in the very end of 87, we won the appeal. It trickled on for a couple more years, but Lubavitch won. They won everything. They won the books, they won 770, and it became a party of no idea. When we won the case initially, they celebrated for 7 days, and the Rebbe let it go on. And after 7 days, the Rebbe said, okay, now let's go back to life. And then made us buckle down every 10 days between then and Yud Shvat. We had to be tested on our learning Nigla and Chassidus, and the Rebbe wanted the scores. They wanted how we did. And the Rebbe said, if you don't give me a mark, it means you're not prepared, which means you didn't learn, which means you're a disappointment to me. The Rebbe really squeezed us. But this is the story of the books on the face of it. And every year on this day, we make a big celebration. I am of that generation. I was 21, 22 years old, 21 when this happened. So I was, from a point of view of Chassidus, at the prime of my life, an adult vocher. What else is there besides the Rebbe? So for me, personally, there's no more important day in the Hasidic calendar than Eight Teves. It's more important to me than this kiss. And I get very emotional when people start to hesitate about how important this day is. I get rather direct in your face. Because to me, I remember the pain that the Rebbe experienced, the heartache that the Rebbe experienced, and the victory, the celebration. So this is a very important day in the Chabad calendar. But the truth of the matter is, if you think about it objectively, it's a shameful day. The Rebbe couldn't get along with his sister-in-law, couldn't get along with his nephew. It was a fight between family members who were royalty. That's the story. It's an unpleasant story. And if you look at it from the outside, you say, what? Really? This is what Lubavitch is busy with? There were a lot of people who felt at that time that the Rebbe was making a mistake by going to war for this. That they should have compromised. The Rebbe said, let him have it. It's not worth it. Lubavitch then was growing. It's not as big as Lubavitch is now. And Lubavitch didn't need this scar on its identity that the Rebbe can't get along with his sister-in-law, with his nephew. But the Rebbe understood that this has to happen. This quote unquote struggle needs to be engaged in, and it has to be won, and we won it. We call it Dida Notzach. That's maybe the label by which you know it, because the Rebbe had a whole different point on this whole thing. And this is what I want to share with you. Okay, I just gave you historical fact. Now, most of you probably know this already. For some of you, this is like a big surprise, and you're wondering why exactly am I wasting your time with this. I want to try and explain to you how the Rebbe understood this entire episode. So that you'll appreciate, number one, why it's important. And number two, why it's important to us today, if you and I sit here in the year January 1st, 2025. The simplest way of explaining the story is that the words of a Rebbe are very important. When a Rebbe says something, you gotta listen. When a Rebbe says something, he means exactly what he said. Doesn't play games. When the previous Rebbe made 770, the library, the property of Good City Chabad, he wasn't doing it for tax purposes. He wasn't doing it to save his library from Europe. It's because that's how he felt. And to accuse the Rebbe of being a liar is a sin in itself. And that the will of the Rebbe be carried out is very important. That what the Rebbe wants should be actualized, the materialized was to our Rebbe enough of a reason to go through this whole Rebbe. I don't know if you are aware, and I'm not going to explain to you the politics, but when our Rebbe got married in 1929, which is also almost 100 years ago, after the Sheva Brachas, the previous Rebbe, who was living in Latvia, Riga, Latvia at the time, sent a telegram into Russia asking a chassid to go to his father's grave, the Rebbe Rashab, and to tell him what you wanted happened. The Rebbe Rashab wanted our Rebbe to marry the Frierdiker Rebbe's middle daughter, and that's what happened. And it was apparently complicated, and the previous Rebbe, at the end of the Sheva Brachas, right after the week of the wedding celebration was over, sent a message to Russia to go to my father's grave and tell him that what you said was done. And the same is true here. The previous Rebbe said that 770 and the Sfarim are a public trust. It has to remain a public trust, and the Rebbe fought for it to be so. That's enough of an explanation. That's enough of an explanation. But there's something much deeper and much more spiritual. And this is where the story becomes important and becomes maybe a little bit hard to understand, but nevertheless, this is the truth of the matter. On a legal level, the way you would explain the story of the building and the books is the concept in halacha and Jewish law that says, "Tzibur ein bachur," communities don't die, people. There's no such thing as the death of a community. You have a shul that belongs to a community. People are born, people grow up, people pass away and replaced. People die, but the community is forever. Lubavitch is a community. And the property that belongs to the community as a whole is as immortal as the community itself. As long as the community lives, the public trust remains. That was the position that we took. They took the position that it was actually private. It was made public just for official purposes. It was just made public to avoid all kinds of other difficulties, but that the Rebbe didn't mean it. And this really deeply upset the Rebbe, that you would say that the previous Rebbe was being duplicitous. And the Rebbe said, excuse me, the Rebbe made it public because he meant, the previous Rebbe made it public because he meant for it to be public. And the community still lives, and as long as the community still lives, we argued you cannot divide the estate of a living community. It didn't belong to the previous Rebbe. It belonged to the community of Lubavitcher Hasidim, and the Lubavitcher Hasidim are very much alive and well, and therefore it belongs to them. This was the position that we took up on a legal level, on a revealed level, on a halachic level, on a legal level. But there's a soul to this, there's a neshama to this, which is very, very important. And the soul of this is that the life of a tzaddik, especially a tzaddik like the previous Rebbe, was never his biology, was never his body. The life of a tzaddik is his life, his legacy. In Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says the life of a tzaddik is his love of God, his fear of God, and his faith in God, his belief in God. Chaya tzaddik einu chayim b'sod. The life of a tzaddik is not a biological life, it's a spiritual life. And that spiritual life lives on in the people who go in his ways. And as long as there are people who go in the ways of the tzaddik and are inspired by his example and by his teaching, which of course inspire in them, on their level, love of God and fear of God, and belief in God and faith in God, the tzaddik lives on. Since the life of the tzaddik was never defined by his biology, the life of the tzaddik was always defined by his spirit, by his ruach. So long as there are people who follow in his footsteps and learn from his teaching and live the way he inspired, that tzaddik lives on through the people who continue in his way. Or in the words of the Chazal, which we're going to have in next week's Parsha, Yaakov Avinu lo yimeis. Yaakov Avinu didn't die. The Gemara said, Yaakov Avinu didn't die. And the Gemara asks the question, what do you mean didn't die? There was a levaya, there was a funeral. And the Rashi says, Nidlahem kameis, they thought he died. What is the reason Yaakov Avinu lo yimeis? What does it mean when you say Yaakov Avinu didn't die? Ma'azarei b'chayim, ma'afhu b'chayim. As long as his children live, he lives. As long as the seeds that he planted continue to grow, he lives. Ma'azarei b'chayim, afu b'chayim. As long as the children live in the ways of the Rebbe lives. And this is how the Rebbe understood it. When the Rebbe addressed the case of the Sfarim, I remember it, the first time. It sounded like a war between spiritual angels and the higher realms. The whole thing sounded very esoteric. It took the Rebbe a few times to explain it in the way you understood we're talking about the physical world. And the Rebbe's point was, in plain English, the Frierdiker Rebbe is alive. And because the previous Rebbe is alive, you cannot divide the estate of a living man. That was the argument. That was the position. What do you mean the Frierdiker Rebbe is alive? Just look around. What did Lubavitch look like in 1950? And what did Lubavitch look like in 1985? Or to say it in more personal terms, what did Lubavitch look in 1985? And what does Lubavitch look like 40 years out in 2025? It's bigger or it's smaller, it's healthier or it's sicker. It's more robust or it's withering, it's waning, it's diminishing. The Rebbe said every day, the Rebbe said, the previous Rebbe is more alive. The Rebbe said in Yiddish, in uns, und bei uns, und durch uns. And I think when the Rebbe said that, he was talking about himself, in us, and by us, and through us, to the whole world. You see that the previous Rebbe continues to live, and he's more alive now than he ever was. And the Rebbe was arguing this on spiritual terms, that the life, the community of Lubavitch is the Rebbe. And as the community of Lubavitch lives by the philosophy and the teaching, the spirit of the Rebbe, so the Rebbe lives on with us, and in us, and by us, and through us. And the Rebbe therefore argued on the physical level, the books and the building belong to the previous Rebbe himself because he's still alive. In other words, technically, it belonged to the community, it belonged to a trust. That's the argument that the lawyers made. Spiritually, the Rebbe took it a step further. The Frierdiker Rebbe is alive. The previous Rebbe lives in every chassid. The previous Rebbe is in every Chabad house, in every effort of spreading Yiddishkeit and Torah and Chassidus, that the previous Rebbe sacrificed his entire life for. In all of that, the Frierdiker Rebbe lives. And that was the position that Rebbe took. So there's two stories, people, and I hope I was clear. I speak English. I don't speak Greek. I don't speak Portuguese, and I don't speak in riddles. I told you the story as directly as I could. Again, if this is all news to you, it's a little bit unnerving. It's a lot to take in, okay? What I just did was I told you a story in two versions. I told you a story on a very physical level. It wasn't pleasant. Let me tell you, it wasn't pleasant. Still not pleasant. Such a sad story that the previous Rebbe's children, the Frierdiker Rebbe's children, couldn't figure these things out, without having to have all this animus, this lack of unity. It's embarrassing, it's upsetting, deeply upsetting, but it is what it is. The one version of the story is, it's a physical version of the story. Were the books in the building private property or a public trust? The previous had made it a public trust. But quote unquote, did he mean it? And we argued that he meant it, and we went to court, we fought, and we won. That's the story on one level. On another level, it has to do with the purpose of a Rebbe, which is Yiddishkeit and Hasidus, and above all else, Hasidim. And that this taking of the books and the ultimate Didanotzach winning in court, the books and the library was a statement to the effect, was a vindication of the fact that actually the previous Rebbe is alive. That was the way the Rebbe saw it, okay? So like I said, I gave you a story on two versions. The question that remains for us to ask is, why did it happen? Now, I'm going to be good because there's a lot of you here. Usually I'm very, very bad. We're going to break now, okay? But now you need to be good and come back in 5 minutes, not in 15 minutes. And we'll talk about the why, okay? That's the second part of the story. Was I clear? I think I was clear, yes? Okay, for those who knew the story, I was clear, right? Okay, come back in 5, please. Yeah, you don't have to come back in 5, you can sit here if you want. But 11:37, there is.
What? Basically, like. Send me a list. Because you were saying.
Oh, please. Thank you very much.
The previous reference, like. No, that's the last. Let's get this. This is the actual. That's the one this one. Ish, he's part of it, and then. That's the previous. I'm just gonna get other people. They were all rabbits.
Thank you.
They were- Had no kids, and he left like instructions and like it was not his, it was not his wishes. Interesting. Yeah, I left my phone down here. What do you? This is good. The work of food, but I just want the food. On the with me last week and he was with the company and she's like, oh what? You know, and then she's like, okay, and she was like, what?
You didn't know wait, you might be in.
Oh, diet.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was incredibly good job.
So cute.
They did end up seeing her.
Oh, because I'm gonna guess. Oh, email was here. Why was Ema here?
She was staying at some house.
Okay, so fair.
She was like, I should go with you. The place is shady. I'm calling you.
Was it shaded? I guess not.
Like she stayed.
Oh, you're going missing. Oh, this is
Mystery.
this is really cool. This is a fun day to talk.
Yeah. It's my friend from college. She was Tomorrow is the final answer.
Okay.
I gave this goal to the flowers yesterday because I didn't want them to like die.
Right.
And then she was like, let's do it on Thursday. It's like Islamic law. Okay. So.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I spoke to one of the teachers.
Well, they have their own dish. Macron doesn't hold it. I surprised you get and it didn't post it. It just takes a while.
Right.
So the goal of, that's what I'm doing. So the secret section,
Yeah.
I have a secret section. And in the secret section, our history through the season. all those classes are in here.
You want to hear nothing past that?
And then the fifth class.
I'm sorry.
Go to St. John's, actually, the second floor, individual prayers indoor. And you have,
Other.
everything is,
Where are you holding the?
we're doing now,
okay.
the Friday, the day before Hashem.
Okay.
We have to do, next we have to do, we started Baruch Shamar.
Yeah.
We do Baruch Shamar in 3 sections.
Okay.
We did a bunch of stuff Baruch Shamar, we're gonna come back to it.
Hey, I was there for.
We'll try it.
Yeah, right, probably.
Okay.
Take our very time.
Progress.
Yeah.
It's just real. Going at first. Yeah, no.
Oh, Swan.
It's not going to shine here.
Oh, shit, I saw Chandra, but we called her Swan. Oh, and she hated it.
Maybe that's now she was like, I'm a bit you being very. See, you can probably be for not seeing.
Oh, no,
No.
she doesn't.
She's doing Search You, I think, online.
Oh.
Or one of those ones. Either Search You, there's another similar.
Not.
She just said, she's like, didn't she want to do? She's like, it doesn't make sense to be in university. But I don't know. Maybe so sure, but I really not. But we spent a lot of time in Villa Lounge together. She's great. And my parents drove her home.
How far is this school from here?
Like an hour.
It's not bad.
It's like 45 minutes without traffic, but Toronto's like one line or something above New York.
One line.
This is really cool. Wait, well, it's not cool, but this is a fun story. Perfect. It's like the parking lot for all of the it's for the wheels. It's so great.
You should see the street I live on.
Oh my gosh, it's so great. She live in the Virgin after that.
No.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you guys eat lunch here? Or guess we don't eat lunch here. Do you eat dinner here? We eat dinner.
It's hard or whatever.
I might go back to
That makes them on the correct again. Right. I don't think that's gonna happen.
Oh, we're ready to start?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
Reading the story. I'll finish.
Let's go.
We just.
reading.
Oh, but I have you rude.
Don't talk at me.
I don't want to be rude. It's teaching.
Okay. If I can have your attention,
Wait.
please. Now. I want to begin this segment by sharing with you that there are audio tapes. I never spoke about this spotting 4 times, probably 5 times. And the way that Rebbe spoke was that that the Frierdiker was alive. That was the spirit of his message. When the previous Rebbe first passed away in 1950, the Rebbe spent a year. During that same year, when he was hesitating becoming the Rebbe, arguing over and over and over and over again that the life of a Rebbe isn't physical, the life of a Rebbe is spiritual, and therefore the Rebbe is still living. Once the Rebbe became Rebbe, that language, that form sort of went into the background. And it resurfaced when the story of the Sodom happened, the Rebbe began to speak the same kind of way that the previous Rebbe alive. Using the same sources. There's sources in Gemara for this, there's sources in Chazal for this, all kinds of sources. And there's a rather emotional statement of the Rebbe when the Rebbe said that I'm screaming that the Rebbe is alive, the previous Rebbe, and that every day he's more alive. And he's screaming that he was at the funeral 35 years ago, he was by the Levaya. And the Rebbe said, so you can understand a little bit the extent to which we don't have the same language. They never use the word sarcastically, but we do have the same language. In other words, he lives in one world, I live in a different world. In his world, when someone passes away, they're finished. In my world, when a person passes away, their body passes away, but their whole life continues. And when you're talking about a tzaddik, that's a very, very real thing. That was the spirit of how the Rebbe talked. The Rebbe was very, very passionate about it. Okay, but The question that I want to address now is the question of why. Why did it happen? We all know why it happened. It was a feud. It was a feud over money. It was a feud over ego. It wasn't just about money. It was really personal. There was a lot of hurt feeling, of anger directed towards the Rebbe, which the Rebbe really was not deserving of. Really, really ridiculous on the face of it. But nevertheless, there was a fight. It was a very unpleasant story. And the Rebbe spoke publicly about it in 3 units of time. He spoke about it in the beginning when the discovery that the books were taken happened. He spoke about it during the trial, which was Hanukkah time, 39 years ago this year. And he spoke about it when we won. And he actually said 3 entirely different things. Initially, when the Rebbe spoke about it in the summer of 1985, he used the language of the feeding that was alive. That was alive, the whole language that I described to you before, how the life of a tzaddik was never a physical life, and as long as his spirit lives, he lives, and therefore you cannot divide the estate of a living person. During the trial, Rebbe spoke about it a lot. Hanukkah, 39 years ago, I was not in New York. I was away from New York the entire time. I left right before it started, and I came back right after it finished. I missed the whole pasha. I was not here at all. But we followed everything. We were living on planet Earth, and they already had hookups and fax machines. It wasn't during the days of email, but we would get all the stuff in New York very quickly. And we knew what was going on. We were partners. We were very much a part of the proceedings. During Hanukkah of 1986, the Rebbe, I think like in 2 days, praying 3 times. It was very, very heavy with talk and with inspiration. The Rebbe wanted that we should put up a Hanukkah menorah in every city in America. We went to places where there were no Jews. Put up a menorah. Because the Rebbe's attitude was that if there's a challenge to the viability of Chassidus, the way to offset that challenge is to do more, which I will explain to you in a few minutes. So during the actual trial, during the 3 weeks of the trial, the language that the Rebbe employed was the need to do more to remove the objection. Okay, now I'll explain this. That the Alter Rebbe was arrested. This is a famous story. The Rebbe, of course, told this story. When the Alter Rebbe was arrested, he sat in jail. And the first time he literally sat in a dungeon. The second time he was treated much more respectfully, but the first time he sat literally in a jail, a dungeon, for 53 days. So the story is famous. It's brought in the base of Rebbe, but they never repeated the story. That while he was in jail, he was visited by his Rebbe's, by the Holy Maggid and the Holy Baal Shem Tov, who had passed away decades before. Baal Shem Tov had passed away almost 50 years before. Almost 50 years before, and there was a Maggid that passed away 36 years before. And the Alter Rebbe said to his Rebbe's, "Why am I sitting in jail?" They came to him, the way the Rebbe told the story, they came in a body, although they had already passed. And he asked them, "Why am I sitting in jail?" And they said, "You're sitting in jail because you're spreading too much chassidus." So the Alter Rebbe said, "Well, if I'm sitting in jail for spreading too much chassidus, I'll do less." And they told him, "No, if you survive, you should do even more." This is what they told him. And the Alter Rebbe understood from this that the criticism levied against him for spreading too much chassidus is not because spreading chassidus is a bad thing. Chassidus is actually a good thing. Right? Why would anybody have an issue with teaching people how to serve Hashem? And the answer is, when you reveal chassidus, you're revealing secrets of Torah. And when you reveal secrets of Torah, they have to be used properly, to be taken advantage of. And if you reveal secrets of Torah, people waste them, it becomes a waste. It becomes an inefficient use. And that's how the Alter Rebbe understood why he was arrested. His arrest physically was because someone on earth didn't like it. Spiritually, he was arrested because there was a challenge to the derech, to the philosophy of life and to the ways of Hasidus and the teaching of Hasidus that he was revealing. There was an objection to what he was doing and that he shouldn't do it. But he saw his victory, his didanotzach, his pada b'shalom, his exodus from his incarceration, as being a victory that was declared on high also, up there, not just here. In other words, the Alter Rebbe went to jail because he was spreading Hasidus. The Alter Rebbe was released from prison because he was told that what he was doing and revealing Hasidus was a good thing. But what changed between when he was arrested and released? The answer is that they did more. When the Alter Rebbe was arrested, the Hasidim made 3 committees. One committee to try and help get him out of jail, one committee to worry about his family, and one committee to spread more chassidus. So when the case of the Sodom was going on, the Rebbe spoke a lot about the books, and he spoke about the idea that when there is an objection to a person revealing more Torah in the world, the solution is to bring even more, not to cut back, to do even more. Because that's where the objection is rooted. The objection is rooted in the fact that we should be doing more and we're not doing enough and we should do even more. This was the language that Rebbe spoke at that time. So during that month, Kislev of 1986, Tafshin Mem Vav, 85, 86, there was a huge increase of Mitzrayim. We did Chanukah, we did any place we could. The Rebbe wanted us to do as much as possible, in the belief that if we'll do more, we'll win this fight. Rabbi Shlomo Kunyan from California, he lived me well, was no youngster. When we won the case, spoke in 770, and he said every Menayda is 100 books, and every film is 10 books. He talked about how the different Pu'ulas Taivas, the good deeds that Hasidim did, were the reason the case was won. Because that's how the Rebbe described it, that when there's a challenge to your legitimacy, spiritually, you don't pull back, you do more, and you earn your legitimacy. So for those who are not clear, in the summer of 85, when the Rebbe talked about the books and the previous Rebbe, his language was the Frierdiker Rebbe is alive, you cannot distribute the estate of a living person. During the trial, the Rebbe spoke about the fact that if there is an objection to what we are doing, it's because we're not doing enough and we need to do more. Okay? But then we won. In the summer, in the winter, in exactly 38 years ago this week, this coming Sunday, will be the 30th anniversary of that case, of winning the case, of the Dan Notzach, as we call it, and the celebration that followed, and all the other events that followed. When the Rebbe spoke about it the 3rd time, he said something very, very interesting and really powerful, incredibly powerful. I'll tell you the story as I understand it, okay? I don't know, I know very little about law, really. The only thing I know less about than law is finance. I don't understand money at all. I don't understand business and investment and money. But I don't understand the law because the law makes sense in a box. It makes sense in a certain context. The law sometimes lacks common sense. And of course, being a lawyer, being a practitioner of law is knowing the parameters of law and knowing how to manipulate it to your advantage. I'm not saying to cheat, but you have to understand the system and work within the system to benefit from the system. So there was a trial that went on for 3 weeks, every day, from morning till night. There were witnesses brought to testify, and a lot of these witnesses literally explained what Chassidus is, what the Rebbe is, what the Baal Shem Tov wanted, what Lubavitch is. People say it was like going to a series of lectures by world-class experts on these subjects. We brought our witnesses, we brought people like Elie Wiesel to testify on behalf of the Rebbe. They brought their witnesses, also scholars from universities, who experts on Chassidus, to give their perspectives. There were also personal testimonies about who owned the books, public or private. You know that the Rebbetzin was deposed. The Rebbetzin Chaim Moshe, the Rebbe's wife, was deposed for 4 hours. And Rabbi Priestley recently revealed that the case lasted for 3 weeks. It finished on a Friday. Right before that day's proceedings closed, the judge asked to see the Rebbetzin deposition again. He'd watched it before. And he watched it for 20 minutes. And he said when it was over, remarkable. He was really impressed with it. Remarkable. Now, I'm not sure exactly what he meant, but in my dumb perspective, what you see when you watch the Rebbetzin talk is she doesn't say an extra word. One of the most important things your lawyer will tell you if you're ever on trial is answer the question. That's it. Don't give, because anything extra is going to be held against you. They're going to use you like a meat grind. And I think on a very down-to-earth level, that Rebbetzin, who was then 86 years old, performed brilliantly. Rabbi Christie was afraid, and the Rebbe said to him, don't worry, she'll pass. And he said in English, she'll pass with flying colors. And she did. They talked to her for 4 hours. They tortured her. They really, really bothered her. And she answered every question, but she only answered questions. So she didn't say anything more. And I think it's quite impressive. I don't know what the judge meant, but this is a fact. That he watched, the last thing he did at the end of the trial was take out the video of the Rebbetzins deposition a second time and watched it for a while. And he commented that it was remarkable. The Rebbe said that it was her words that swayed the judge. But then it took a year, 12 months, for the judge to give a verdict. And there was no way to know. The judge did not play his hand. During the trial, it was very hard to know what the judge was actually thinking. There were times that you thought that it was leaning to our side. There were times, again, I missed it all. I didn't see any of this. But my friends did. My brother did. He was always keeping me up. Every week I call my brother, get a lowdown of what's going on at 7:70. But on a Tuesday morning, they were both sides were told that the judge has a verdict. They should come to the court to pick up the verdict, the written verdict. And the judge gave the verdict on a Tuesday morning, and we won everything. It was a big surprise. So the story goes, Rabbi Krinsky went to the court to pick up the verdict, and he came to 770 to deliver it to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was in his room, and the Rebbe was working. He was one of the Rebbe's secretaries, which means he had a right to walk into the Rebbe's room. I would imagine that you didn't just walk in, you knocked. And the Rebbe, the Rebbe would say, Aran, you can come in, and then you would walk in. And he handed the Rebbe the verdict, or he told the Rebbe the verdict. The way Rabbi Krinsky tells the story was the Rebbe did not even look up. He continued going. He continued going. Rabbi Groner says that the Rebbe asked him if there could be an appeal. And Rabbi Groner says there could be an appeal. So the Rebbe said, what are they singing and dancing about? There could be an appeal. But when the Rabbi Krinsky told the Rebbe, the only reaction the Rebbe got was, call the Rebbe, tell my wife. Tell the Rebbe. Because she struggled and suffered with the Rebbe during this whole parsha. She fought on the Rebbe's side against her sister. It was not a pleasant experience for the Rebbe to win the way he felt that it needs to be. And the only comment that I made Rabbi Krinsky was that tell the Rebbe, downstairs, I can't tell you what was going on. It was pandemonium. It made Simchas Torah look like Tisha B'Av. It was nuts. So when the Rebbe had to come out to Mincha, the Rebbe got Mincha upstairs in the small shul. They asked the Rebbe to go downstairs. They walked the shul downstairs. The walls were dripping. The energy was unbelievable. And remember again, I was not there. I listened to this on Hookup in Los Angeles. And then I went to his place and showed no reaction to what was going on around. They never walked into the show like as if he had no idea that it was a big celebration. Everyone was in a very good mood. And quite a few people were after the influence of a lot of Inkenhall, as they say. They went to the front of the show. He davened Mincha. He asked for a chumash at some point. And we were listening to the play-by-play. We were on the hookup, so they would tell us what's going on. That's for a chumash. And the Rebbe spoke. It was a surprise. The Rebbe showed no emotion, he showed no joy. He didn't in any way encourage the singing. We didn't need his help at that time. We were doing just fine by ourselves. And if the Rebbe had helped us along, the ceiling would have come down. But the Rebbe did speak. And it was Tuesday of Parshas Vayigash, which was yesterday's Chitas. And he spoke a number of things. But the point that I wanted to focus on first is, he spoke about the books, and he says, there was a contention. There was an objection to the ownership of the books. To whom do the books belong? To whom to 770 belong? The basis for the contention was the argument that Agudas Chasidei Chabad is no longer active. That this trust, this public organization, the Union of Lubavitcher Hasidim, who was the owner of these books, who was the owner of this home, who was the owners of this trust, only remain the owners of the books and the owners of the building, the owners of the trust, if they're active in their work. If they stop existing, the trust disappears, the community disappears. So the Rebbe says the objection was that the community is not sufficiently active. And if the community is sufficiently active, then you can go back to a question of private ownership. But then the Rebbe says something very remarkable. The Rebbe says, how could anybody say that? How could anybody say that Lubavitch, a goodness of Sidi Chabad, is not active enough after what's been done in the last 35 years? Now, I want to give you context. The Alter Rebbe was a big Rebbe, right? He had great Chassidim. And the Alter Rebbe understood that he went to jail because he hadn't done enough in spreading Chassidus. He needed to do more. Our Rebbe said, it's impossible to say we didn't do enough. Now, the Rebbe is not lying. He's not trying to make us feel good. The Rebbe said it because he believed it. The Rebbe believed that in the time of the Alter Rebbe, the great Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, as much as they had done to spread Chassidus, they had not done enough, and as a consequence of this, the Alter Rebbe went to jail. Our Rebbe said, it's impossible to say that Lubavitch has not done enough because we've done so much. It can't be explained this way. So then we're back to the question. If, in fact, Agudas Chassidic Chabad is alive and active as it is. And as the Rebbe said then, every day he's more alive, every day he's more energetic, every day he's more robust, every day he's more active. And this is a story of 38 years ago. You think about Lubavitch today, Lubavitch is amazing. Lubavitch is a ness. It's such a miracle. I mean, most of you are joining Lubavitch. Most of you never saw the Rebbe in your life. Your parents never saw the Rebbe. You're involved with a Rebbe who's gone from this earth a time and a half as long as you're on this earth. Literally. So what brings you here? Because it's living. It's not the past, it's the present, it's not dead, it's alive. It's alive because of Chassidim. It's alive because of Shluchim. It's alive because we live the way the Rebbe wants us to live, in the kind of way that because of us, in us, by us, and through us, the Rebbe lives. And it draws people in an unprecedented number. It's an amazing thing. And I like to say this because no one else is saying it. People talk about the miracle of Shlichus, and it is a miracle. Shlichus has been multiplied, I don't know, 500% since Gimel Tammuz or more. But I tell you that as no less a miracle as the miracle of the Lubavitch community, the family of Lubavitch Chassidim. We got politics, we got our stuff, but we are one community. If you look at other places in the Jewish world that have similar situations to our own, they're torn asunder, they don't talk to each other. We got our differences, we're very, there's people who believe this, people who believe this, and they really disagree. But I tell you that just as great a miracle as the onset and the continuation of the body of Shlichus is, the fact that Lubavitch is a community, still is a community, and still sees itself as a family, in spite of all the wrinkles and the scratches and the whatever else it is it's mamish and es. But this was the story of the books then. The claim was that Lubavitch is over. The Lubavitch is over? Lubavitch is never more alive than it is right now. If Lubavitch is more alive than it is right now, so what was the book taken for? In other words, if you compare it to the Alter Rebbe said, if we did more, it wouldn't have happened. And the Rebbe said, nah, we did plenty. So why did it happen? In other words, the philosophical idea was the same, that the going to jail, the books being taken, was a sign that they were not happy with us on high. And when they're not happy, it creates a sneeze in this world. But the Rebbe said, we're not like the times of the Alter Rebbe. In times of the Alter Rebbe, it may have been true that Chassidim should have done more to spread Chassidus. You can't say that about our generation. So the Rebbe asked the question, considering what we have done in the last 35 years, I don't understand how the books could have been taken. In other words, not that Pliny and Pliny, this particular person who have taken the books on the physical level. Because the Rebbe wasn't paying attention to the book. They were always looking at the spirit of it. The books were not taken because he needed along with his nephew. The books were taken because upstairs they were not happy with him. And they said, how can they be unhappy? Look what we've done. And the Rebbe's final answer, after talking about it, was that there's nothing wrong with what we've done. They simply want us to do. That the reason the books were taken is not because there's anything wrong with the activities of Lubavitch today. How good is Chassidim is so alive, it's impossible to say anything to the contrary. So why were the books taken? Because they're saying, Lamaila, you're doing great, but we want more. We want more. We want more. That's how the Rebbe himself explained the taking of the book. Now, in that same season, it was on a Tuesday. Today is Wednesday. That year was Tuesday. It was yesterday's Chitas. Remember yesterday's Chitas? Yesterday's Chitas is the perfect Chitas for the events connected to the Rosh Chodesh Teves and Teves. Because what is the story of yesterday's Chitas? That Yosef reveals himself to his brothers, tells them, go back home, tell your father I'm alive, and tell him to come to Mitzrayim. Right? You learned Chitas yesterday? There's different versions of how the Aliyahs are divided, but according to the Chabad custom, they go back to Yisrael, and they tell Yankov Avinu, Oid Yosef Chai, he's still alive. And of course, as Chazal say, not only he's alive biologically, he's the same Yosef, the same Yosef that called Teirasai, all the Torah that Yankov Avinu learned in Shem Be'eber here with Yosef. Yosef is now running the world, and he's the same Yosef he was 22 years before when he left you. and I couldn't believe it, right? This is the story. So the Aliyah finishes, yesterday's Chitas finishes with the words, Vatchi Ruach Yaakov Avinu. The spirit of Yaakov came to life. So Rashi says. And the Rebbe spoke about all of this in thinly veiled form, but he did speak about it. That Shar Salov Ruach HaKodesh, that it says in Sfarim, Rashi brings it in Chumash, that for a person to have Ruach HaKodesh, for a person to experience prophecy, they have to be in a good mood, to be happy. When a person is depressed, when a person is sad, the Ruach HaKodesh leaves. When Yosef Atzaddik disappeared, Yaakov became depressed. And as Rashi said in Parashat Vayeshev, he was unconsolable. He could not be calmed down because, in fact, Yosef was still alive. The halacha is, Taylor says, when someone dies, we forget. It's considered a very big bracha. Forgetting is a bracha, but you only forget once a person actually passes away. Yaakov wouldn't forget because even though he didn't know it, Yosef was alive. So for 22 years he mourned. So for 22 years he lost his Ruach HaKodesh. So when Yaakov is told that Yosef is still alive, he gets back his Ruach. That's why yesterday's Chitas finishes, but Ruach, and it was the day that we won the books. You couldn't have, if you go through the entire Chumash, there's about 350 aliyahs. There's not another aliyah that comes close to serving the purposes of the story of the Dan Notzach as this one. That Yosef, the Frierdiker, his name was Yosef. Yosef is still alive. But the whole thing is so dramatic. At the time, it was dramatic. You look at it in hindsight, it's like you couldn't have timed this better if you were writing your own script. That the whole issue was, on a spiritual level, what is the Rebbe? Is the Rebbe living? And the answer to that question is, look at the Chassidim. If you want to see if the Rebbe is alive, look at his Chassidim. And if you claim that the Rebbe is not living because you don't like how the Chassidim look, the Chassidim must take a look in the mirror. And the Rebbe says, I like what I see. I like what I see in the mirror. So what's the deal? We have to be more alive. And the Rebbe said in that same Sikha that the end of that story is Yaakov comes to life. And the Rebbe didn't say it, but he implied it, that for the Rebbe, this was a redemption, that Pasha Baruch gave back his life. This is the story of the books. So every person, this is the story. And for a week we celebrate. And the Rebbe spoke almost every night. During that week, the Rebbe said that there's a it's a special moment. You can ask anything you want, and whatever you want, you'll get. And the Rebbe said, you don't have to worry about me reading it, because I'm not even going to read your note. I'm going to take it to the oil and drop it on the feet and get out. And from all over the world, people sent letters. Many people were non-Lubavitch. And there were big miracles. People didn't have children. The Rebbe just took bags and bags and bags of letters from the whole world and just dumped it by the feet of the Rebbe. I'm not even going to read it. The previous Rebbe will read it himself. So you don't have to worry about anybody reading your private affairs. You can ask whatever's on your heart and your mind, and you can have bracha v'atzlocha, bakel mikakel, and all good things. So for a week. At the end of that week, the Rebbe, like I said, he lassoed us in. And at the time, the Rebbe said, forget about it, forget about it, forget about the books, forget about the case. The Rebbe said not even to read the verdict of the judge. But then they made an appeal. They made an appeal. And we won the appeal a year later, on the 25th day of the month of Cheshvan, which is like something in November of 1987. And the Rebbe shut that down. We wanted to make another week of partying. I was back. Yes, I wanted to make up for lost back. And the Rebbe didn't let them go to learn. Last year was enough, So when it came the first anniversary of that date, which was 1988, there was a big split in Lubavitch. All the older Hasidim were afraid to make too much of a party because they understood from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wants to put it behind him, like as if it never happened. The Bacharim wanted to make the biggest tumult, and guess what? I was in Russia. I missed that too. I missed everything next to the books. I was fortuitously not here. I missed that also. There was a bunch of division in 770. Should they celebrate it? Anyway, the Bachim managed to put up a sign on the wall. They screwed it into the wall in such a way that there was no way to take it down before Shabbos, announcing the day and the celebration and da-da-da. And the Magabai, the elder, everyone was worried how the Rebbe was going to react. Anyway, the Rebbe started the Fabring and the next day would say that on the wall it's written that today is a special day, it's a big Yom Tov, and the Rebbe made it a Yom Tov. And he quoted the Gemara by Chanukah. That when the story of Chanukah happened, it wasn't made a Yom Tov right away, it was made a Yom Tov the following year. And the Rebbe said the same thing with Shana Acheres Kovim, that he came on the Yom Tov the year after. So the official birth date of this celebration in Lubavitch is not 1987, but 1988. And I want to explain to you how I lived this, and how I experienced this, and how I felt it, and how I feel it, with the few minutes that I have left. It's almost as if you were to say that the books were not on trial, the Rebbe was on trial. And when you say the Rebbe was on trial, what you're really saying is he real or is he not real? Is this real or not? You know, everybody knows what a dollar bill is. But what about spirituality? What about life? What about metaphysical truths? How real are they? How true are they? We have only one barometer, only one measure about the credibility of anything that is. And the barometer is how much it takes root in the world. The truth of a spiritual philosophy is in the people who practice it, who sustain it, who live it, who continue to pass it along to their children, who don't let it die, who keep it alive. And it was a fight, and I hate to use that word. It was a struggle over books and over ability, which on a very technical level was a financial thing. It was a monetary thing, with dollars. On a little bit more pointed level, it was ego. It was a personal fight. But on the Rebbe's level, it was a challenge to the credibility of the idea of Lubavitch. The previous Rebbe came to this country, and he created a whole new Lubavitch. The Rebbe succeeded him 10 years after he got here, and expanded and broadened and revolutionized further the new ideas, the new philosophy, new approach that the previous Rebbe brought to this country about the idea of worrying about every Jew in the world, and that the flavor of Hasidus of our generation is more about Mitzrayim than about Avodas Atfilah, which is the tradition of Chabad. And then someone comes along and questions all of it. And you can question it many ways. One of the ways you question it, they made a whole new Lubavitch, you know. It used to be an old Lubavitch. Old Lubavitch was very uptight, very insular, very intense, and very small. Now you have a much more open Lubavitch, much more positive Lubavitch, much more generous Lubavitch, much more pluralistic Lubavitch. This is a new fish. And the Rebbe says the same fish, same exact living being that adapted because the world changed, not because Chassidus changed. And that's what was on trial. Is this the Alter Rebbe or not the Alter Rebbe? Is it the Baal Shem Tov or not the Baal Shem Tov? Is it Moshe Rabbeinu or not Moshe Rabbeinu? That's what it came down to. And if somebody can come along and say, this is my private property, so physically he's asking for the money. Physically he's asking for the property. Spiritually, he is arguing against the new version of Hasidus, which is ours. That is what was on trial. And the verdict of the judge, who the Rebbe made a point of saying was a non-Jew, because he wasn't Jewish, when it comes to Jewish affairs, he's not a man of free will. He says what God tells him to say, subconsciously, subliminally. The Didad Notzach winning meant, no, this is the same fish. It's very much alive, and it's the same thing. In other words, the story of Hay Teves, this celebration, which we have this Sunday coming up, is a celebration of the vibrancy of the Rebbe. The Rebbe lives, and the Rebbe lives in us. The Rebbe lives in each one of us, and every chassid. Like he said from the Gemara over and over again, Ma'azari b'chaim, ahu b'chaim. As long as his seeds continue to be planted and grow, and his children live in his footsteps, they follow in his ways, they're inspired by his lead, and they continue to do what it is that he inspired, he lives in them and by them and through them. So this is a big Yom Tov. It's especially a big Yom Tov considering the fact that 35 years ago we experienced Gimel Talmud, whatever it is, 30 years ago. None of you have met the Rebbe, right? Your meeting the Rebbe has to do with this Yom Tov. 30 years after Gimel Talmud, you come here and you want to develop personal relationship with the Rebbe. Some of you succeed, some of you don't succeed. One of the great chances of every person to develop a personal relationship with the Rebbe. And of course, ultimately, the highest level of being a Lubavitcher is to serve, to live our lives, doing the things that Rebbe wants us to do, to help bring Mashiach and Kingdom, each one our own corner, each one our own way, but we try our best to serve. Some of us serve directly, some of us serve indirectly, some of us serve officially, some of us serve unofficially, but we all try to be Chassidim of the Rebbe. The foundation of all of that is this celebration. That the idea that the life of a tzaddik was never a physical life, never. The life of a tzaddik was a spiritual life. And spirits don't die. As long as there are candles with fuel, holding on to that flame, that spirit lives. If chas v'shalom, all the fuel is exhausted, and the fuel is not renewed, and the fuel is not replaced, then that flame floats away. And the challenge to the identity of Lubavitch, and the Didanotzach, the victory of Lubavitch, was a very small part of our books. It was a very small part about 770. It was in a much bigger part of the Rebbe. And as much as it's about the Rebbe people, it's about us. Every boy and girl who comes into Lubavitch, who was born in Lubavitch, and somehow grows up to be a chassid. I have a former student that I communicated with. He lived by me close to 30 years ago. A wonderful boy. His life has not been easy, but he calls himself an atheist. I mean, he's an atheist like I'm an astronaut, like I'm a Martian astronaut. But he's an atheist. So he met my son yesterday on Mitzrayim. The guy's in his 40s. He went with them on Mitzrayim. I don't put some film every day. And he actually did it. I did the recordings are so delicious. He said, Mitzrayim's hard. And he was one of my best students. It's a painful story. We're friends. We're quite warm to each other. So he was talking to my son, who was all of 17, about his relationship with me. And I knew him in 1997, when I had 2 or 3 kids, almost 30 years ago. And he was so turned on by this, by going on Mitzrayim. Just going with the button, watching them. He knew them personally. He's probably born in 1978, 79. He knew them well. He's watching kids who were born 15 years after Gimel Talmuds, and he sees them, and it just he didn't watch them. He participated. He went. So I went on Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is hard. And I'm watching these kids, and what impressed him the most was that it's sitting in the van on the way to the Mitzrayim. What were they doing? They were learning Rambam. He says they blew me away. Those boys are Hey Teves. Those boys and their lives, and it's not a perfect system, and not everybody comes out. It's tough. A lot of the kids go through all kinds of stuff like everybody else in the world, but they, on one level or another, the Rebbe touches them, a Rebbe that they never saw. And when they grow up and they have chassidus, and they have this real connection to the Rebbe, that is Didanotzach. That's the victory of the books. Because the victory of the books is not about the books. The victory of the books is about the viability of the Rebbe. The Rebbe lives in us, in each chassid, in every boy and girl, in every man and woman, in every good deed, in every Beis Chabad. So this holiday is not just personal and important. It's alive. We have a day in our calendar that we celebrate Didanotzach. Now, the way we celebrate Didanotzach, you go buy books. That's the custom, okay? Hanukkah, you light candles. Hey, Tevis, you buy books. But buying books is a custom, The neshama of this day, the spirit of this day, is a celebration of the idea that a human being lived on this earth for reasons that known only to God. For the last 30 years, physically at least, we don't see him walking this earth. But he's alive in each one of us. Because the way he lived his life defined him not by his body, but by his spirit. And that spirit is stronger now than it was 30 years ago. And every day that passes is stronger than it was the day before. That's alive. That's amazing. It's alive. And this is the Yom Tov. When people say they're celebrating books, it's for me, it's anticlimactic. It's not books. It's the Rebbe. And it's not even the Rebbe. It's Chassidim. It's Chassidim. So if you're new to Lubavitch and you're hearing about this for the first time, and it sounds so embarrassing, try to understand the spiritual side of this. And appreciate that when the Rebbe first started, the very, very beginning, that was the side he showed. He showed the spiritual side, the life of an Rebbe. And he absolutely connected the life of an Rebbe to the life of Chassidim. And the life of Chassidim is us. And in due time, it's Hashem, your children. And we're expecting Mashiach, you know that. We're expecting Mashiach forthwith. So at some point, there's going to be a whole different situation, right? But at the moment, this is the challenge. Anyway, I hope I presented the idea accurately and alive and positively and joyously. Okay, we good?
Yeah.
Does anybody want to say anything? You have Because Mrs. Yaffe gonna knock on the door in 4 minutes, and when she knocks, you can't ignore her. So does anybody want to speak? Have 4 minutes to say what's on your mind. Okay, I'll let you go early. Go eat lunch.
Wait, actually, I do have a question.
Okay.
Why, like, why was it different by the Frierdiker Rebbe and our Rebbe about the books and dividing the assets and like the other Rebbe, it seemed.
They didn't do it. Theatry did, get a hold of the judge's verdict. I'm sure you can find it online and read it. First of all, the Rebbe did do something different. The previous Rebbe made a change. What the judge ascertained, he was a smart man. He studied Lubavitch, was that what the previous Rebbe did formally was always true informally. It wasn't incorporated. In the shtetl of Lubavitch in Russia, you didn't have to legally incorporate Lubavitch. It was a corporation that didn't have a stamp. Everybody understood that a Rebbe and his community are a place of the meeting in public and private, which really explained, and the judge understood this, that although there was division of estates in earlier generation, that Abayim did it reluctantly. They would have preferred that it wouldn't be divided. Because of the nature of America and the nature of finance in America, what the Rebbe said once, in America, money is the golden calf. It's true. And also very important, the nature of the Lubavitch. Lubavitch was going to take a much more public and formal role than it ever did. Lubavitch was a very insular Chassidus. Lubavitch was an elite Chassidus for very smart people. It wasn't a street Chassidus. It wasn't for everybody. And Lubavitch has become the most for everybody Chassidus. For all of these reasons, the Rebbe saw the need. And he did it right away, you should know. The Frierdiker Rebbe was a very interesting man. As soon as he came to this country, he made new organization and incorporated everything. He wanted everything to be legal by recognized by the state, by the federal government, by the local government, that these are official organizations. There was a tax number for America, there was a tax number for Machane Yisrael, there was a tax number for Agudas Chabad. The Rebbe wanted everything to be on board. Very important to him. You can see it in his writing, in his letters. And the Rebbe did it, the previous Rebbe did it because he understood the nature of America. He understood that in America you have to do things. What the judge appreciated was that he was really continuing the old tradition, that a Rebbe is a meeting point between the notion of public and the notion of private. He can do whatever he wants, and he can do whatever he wants because he's the ambassador of the community. But that in America was necessary to incorporate. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I would jump to. Azak, be well. Be good. Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Got it for us.
Rabbi Paltiel, you'll be here next Wednesday, right?